is a formula. Okay, a formula. Uh, this is the formula. Okay. It's kidding. It's just kidding. You don't know. Don't worry. I'm funny in Spanish. English make him a serious guy. But okay, the formula it's simple. Okay, the formula for this change is very simple. There's not formula. The formula is the education or formulates education. Why? Okay. When we study a specific topic, remember when study a specific topic or study something about the field that interests us, we must learning the terms and read many books or documents or papers. In esports, there is not much difference, okay? But we must add the additional factor, the secret of esports, and is play the game. This is the secret to understanding esports, sorry, being able to work in the ecosystem. To build an esports career, you must unlearn what you have learning and learn again, okay? It's remember is to build an esports career, you must unlearn what you have learned and learn it again. You cannot talk about esports if you don't not understand who their disciplines develop or what are the rules of games, okay? All esports is have a particular rules and particular regulations. It's very necessary learn of this. 2 months ago, I remember 2 months ago, I spoke to Mr. Kumar about this. Tom Hill told him that this was a big problem in our profession, especially in Latin America.
Okay. Okay, David is back again.
Sorry, my internet again. Sorry, my internet again. It's no problem. It's no problem. Okay. Here. Okay. Listening. Okay. I remember. Okay, I'm speaking to Mr. Kumar for this. As lawyer, okay, we have failed a lot when entering in the sports systems. Okay, we have mistakes and a great generation in Latin America. This generation called the lions. Okay, the big old lions, but this generation doesn't allow us to grow, or they do not allow us to contribute with our profession and our knowledge since
Hello, David.
it's possible the internet failed with my presentation. I am afraid only speak. That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm returned to the idea. Okay, This generation is the generation grow up with the video games, and this generation is part of the lives because we are the generation that created the esports. Okay. Um, um, this does not happen with all lawyers. Okay. I see this not happen with all lawyers. I want to make that clear. Okay. And I don't want to be talking as disrespect, but what I'm talking about here is what teams, pro players, organization owners, the president of the one federation told me there are many professions or there are many professionals who don't understand what we're talking about today for esports. I will give you two examples in my presentation, two examples, but okay. Two examples and what I'm saying. Okay, I'm read for my presentation in this moment. Say example one. Hi, I want to hire a player for my FIFA 20 team. I'm looking for someone young who can participate in the tournament that Telcel is organizing in 5 months. I have the money, but I don't who to make your contract. Will you help me? Okay, this is the example one. Okay, now the example two. Hi, I need someone to help me. My team will participate in the Telcel Honor Division, and I want to renew my roster. I will just keep the support, so I will need a jungle, top lane, might, and ADC who know who to carry well. I need the jungle that it's farming all time. The last jungle did not know how to do his job, and when we wanted to gank, we could never buy good items for the game. Very confused now. The first example is what we would like to see happen. Okay, simple way to tell us think. The second example is a normal day in League of Legends or with League of Legends team. Okay, because it's very important study for understand the different terms or the different rules in the game or in the esports. I want to tell you is that to build an esports career, you must know the game, but you must play the game, you must love the game, and you must understand the game. Maybe in the beginning they don't understand. For this example, the example two is maybe you don't understand when I talk about. Some will learn faster or understand games better, but this is all about playing and growing with the game. This is the secret for the esports. You need play the game, you need love the game, okay? To build an esports career, you must think about how do you want to build, okay? Do you want to lead a team, or do you want to be a pro player? Do you want to start a new profession on esports, or do you want to focus your profession on esports? If you want to build your career in esports, a pro player, for example, you must be clear about what esports discipline you will practice. If you want to play MOBA like Dota 2 or League of Legends, Battle Royales like Fortnite, RTC like StarCraft shooter or first-person shooter or third-person shooter, or maybe any shooter but like Rainbow Six or Gears of Wars, fighting games like Street Fighter or Super Smash Bros, virtual TCG like Magic or Clash Royale, or traditional sports like soccer, for example, FIFA, or basket, NBA 2K, or many others. Okay, and I have one tip, one type for the public. If you are going to start your career as a professional player or pro player, you should have a lawyer. Okay, the professional teams have one or many lawyers, including a law firm. Contracts are one of the many problems beginning players. Sometimes they don't know you understand what they sign. Sorry. Um, so help is always good, but remember to have a lawyer who understands your sport. Sorry. Otherwise, the problem, this is the principal problem, you need a lawyer to understand the esports, okay? Now in Latin America exists a esports lawyer, but repeat, this esport lawyer don't understand the esports. The example two is maybe it's real, not in Gametron, it's a real in a lawyer firm with my friends. But speak to esports or building a career in esports is a learning a new concept or a new idiom or a new language. Sorry. Return for this in different careers esports. If you want to start as organization, for example, okay, to speak now for organization. If you want to start an organization, maybe be strong to G2, T1, Isurus, KLG, Azules, or Anahuac, you must know that you must have a great support team, okay? You need a team of lawyers, psychologists, nutritionists, chefs, streamers, trainers, marketing, and business management. They must remember the goal rule, okay? If you building an organization, do you remember a goal rule? This is a rule that is very important for the for you complete your goals. You are the CEO. You are not. You are a CEO or you are a pro player, but you cannot do both. Okay.
David, if I can ask a question in relation to some of the points you said, and the risk of coming across as selling our services, I think the point you made in relation to an esports athlete when he or she is starting up having a lawyer, I do agree with that to a great extent because I've seen it in our practice. I'm sure Peter and Sarah will corroborate. As will some of our friends on the panel and participating right now, that a lot of the esport athletes, when they're starting up, are abused with regards to the contracts they sign. Because as you rightly said, a lot of the time, they don't always know what they are signing away for, particularly when it comes to some of the employment rights and the intellectual property rights thereafter. So I completely agree with that. But the other side of it, if I look at it from an academic perspective, the reality is, and I think you'll agree, that the esports sector, whilst it's growing really quickly, hasn't developed enough for us to really have bona fide esports lawyers. We've got people that know and understand the sector more, but it is still just a case of understanding regular legal principles within the esports concept. Is that something that you would agree with, or would you contradict me in that sense?
Okay. Yes, we are growing with ecosystem. These sports grow very fast. Um, but but as lawyers, uh, uh, mm, okay, for me, it's very complicated uh, answer this question because I'm a lawyer. Okay, I'm a lawyer. In my career or in my new career, day by day in esports, for me it's very important to study the ecosystem and study the game and study the different structures. Okay, I don't for me the the lawyer's job, it's very important, but for the ecosystem it's not really. The principal problem with the ecosystem on esports is this human group maybe think the lawyers is a possible destructor for the ecosystem. It's not a lie. Um, for but the reality is very different. Okay, the lawyers or or maybe I don't know, or experience or lawyer experience can help and stabilize.
Yeah.
I think his network is gone. Can you guys hear me?
Sayo, you're
Am I
back.
audible?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
David, I think David's network was unfortunately struggling a little bit. I think I'm very conscious of the time that you guys have got and put together. Shall we invite our good friend Sarah Ochwada to come onto the stage and to start progressing with her part? And Sarah, if you wouldn't mind, I know that David's connection was waning a little bit. I know there are some points in relation to the ecosystem that maybe you could reiterate as well. I know that the internet in Kenya is fantastic at the moment, so we don't expect such issues with your good self.
Yeah, the internet is great, but I'm not sure about the electricity. It might go anytime. So fingers crossed, this is not going to be a candlelit romantic session and things will be okay.
Good.
Okay,
I'll
so,
send everybody out for that.
sorry?
I said I'll send everybody out. It will be just us.
Well, let's just hope it does not happen. Okay.
No
So let me try and summarize what the esports ecosystem is, and then hopefully I can go into the session that I was supposed to explain. So esports came up as a bunch of people who, or rather just consumers of video games, but the video games themselves start off at the very beginning with game development. So you have game developers who come up with a game. So there's a whole subset, an entire environment of illustrators, storytellers, graphic designers. And at that stage, you have copywriters, intellectual property lawyers, to get that story in place before you put it into the context of a video game. Now, once you have your video game, you move on into the publishing world. So a game publisher will do something very interesting. What they'll do is they will help you sell your game or help you get your game from development into the hands of your consumers. And game development varies depending on which company or which gaming company you're from. So you have video games for consoles. So that's where you play with your consoles. Think of the PlayStations and the Xboxes, and to a certain extent, Nintendo with their Nintendo, what do you call it? The thing you walk around with.
Switch.
Switch.
Switch,
Thank you.
okay.
Switch. We as well, but Switch. The Nintendo Switch. Then you have gaming for mobile. I've seen Emmanuel has mentioned PUBG as well as Call of Duty, which are mobile games, which are very popular, especially in Kenya. And then you have streaming games which are streamed and played online via PC. Okay. So all these games have variations, and you need to get the right platform where you will sell your game. So a game publisher will come in and help you to promote the game, to advertise it so that eventually you can be able to get money from your game as a game developer. So there's that. But once you're a consumer, of course, you are able to play with the game and interact. And there are various types of games. There's single shooter games, there's multiplayer games, there's battle games, there's sports or football games, team games, all sorts of games. Now, these games have different types of communities. And within those communities, of course, you could either play alone in your house, or you could play with your mother or your grandmother if she's that hip, or if you get online, you can play with your friends. Now, the wonderful thing about esports is communities came together and wanted to play against each other. And most likely you want to play against someone who is going to be formidable. So it grew from a few people playing against each other to people organizing themselves into communities to try and get the best of the best to play against them. So then you get your esports teams. Initially, what it was just a bunch of people who, at the very beginning, if you can remember the arcade games, I don't know if you have any much older people who used to visit arcades, video arcades. Okay, Dev, I see you. Adeyemi, I see you. Shayo, I see you. So if you walked into an old school video arcade, you can imagine playing an arcade game against someone else, right? Now that concept, of course, you don't just walk into an arcade game for free, you have to pay to play, correct? So that concept is the same concept we're using for esports tournaments today. Whereas you have your esports teams and you have your esports communities, but in order for these teams and communities to play against each other, someone must organize them into different pools that can play against each other. So that's where you get the licensing of an esports tournament and why it's very important. Now, two things I have to bring up before I move on. Esports licensing is important because you can't just set up an esports tournament without a license from the game developer or the game publisher, right? So the game developer owns the intellectual property of the game itself. The copyright, the trademarks, everything to do with the animation, the graphics, the storytelling elements, even some of the trademarking or the marks within the game are protected through law under the intellectual property regimes of copyright and trademark. So for you to come up with a tournament by which you're going to give some sort of prize or reward, you have to ask the owner of the game to stage this tournament. You can't just wake up one day and decide, well, neighbors, good morning. Today is the day I'm going to host a tournament. Come out and I'll give you, I don't know how much you guys, 100,000 naira. I don't know how much that is in Kenya shillings, yeah. So these game developers have systems by which they decide what amount your license is going to be worth. So if you have a community game, for example, where the pool of money does not go beyond, is it 2,000 US dollars? If it's a community game, then the price for licensing is much lower. If it's an international game with a much bigger price, let's say of $2 million, well, we would hope to get there, then the license fee is much, much higher. Now, the place where lawyers come in is, first of all, how do you find who the game developer or game publisher in charge is to give this money to? if you're going to play a FIFA tournament, who do you have to go to? EA Sport. Okay. So you don't go to EA Sport for every single game on your roster. You have to find the right game developer or game publisher to approach so that you can get your license. I hope we're together until there. So once you have your license, you can go on to set your tournament. Now, it's very interesting because the esports ecosystem also has a variety of other people who support it. One of which is venues. So for now, unfortunately, because of COVID, we're all playing online. But previously, if you wanted to have an esport tournament, you get a venue where you get all these players together and you play your games against each other. Venues are very good because aside from the fact that you can set up different cameras for streaming what's actually happening on the screens, you can also very quickly check who is cheating, right? Although there are other ways of checking who would be cheating within the game, whether you're using a code or a bot or a game bot to cheat through your various levels. But generally, you do have individuals who are there to check on the honor or the respect of the game is being followed. Then you also have, like I mentioned, streaming. You can stream the plays online, and then you also have not hosts, but people who are commentators of the games. Those who know the teams very well, they understand the players, they understand the statistics that the players have had, and they can be able to tell the audience who is listening or is online watching from away from the venue about how the games are progressing. So that's the venue setup itself. But you also have some very interesting other industries which have propped up as a result of this ecosystem. Another industry which has popped up is esports coaching. So there are people who are actually there to teach you how to play various esports or various video games. Then you also have now a franchise where you can actually own a bar which is specifically for watching esports and hanging out with other esports enthusiasts. And some of these enthusiasts aren't just esports people who play or enjoy watching esports. You also have a very strong community of cosplayers or costume players, people who love to dress up in costumes of characters from the different games. So they can come together in these venues and just hang out or have their own fashion competitions based on what they've the kind of different costumes that they've come up with. I'm trying to remember what other things. You also have esports agencies. So, for example, David went through a lot of what sometimes you can have a team, other times you have a lawyer, but sometimes you just need an agent to help you manage your team. In which case you have your labor relations and labor laws to cover these teams. Unfortunately, an agent is not your employer. You don't have an employer-employee relationship, right? An agent actually is supposed to be working for you, not the other way around. But a lot of people get that twisted. So in this case, your agency is supposed to be helping you get enough practice and help you get into competitions and help you get the money from the competitions and disburse the money to your team members. If your agent does not do that, run very fast. Might not be an agent, okay? You also have, like I had David speak about nutritionists, etc., which are very important. But now you have a situation where you have sponsors who come in to try and sponsor either the players or are interested in having their products displayed during the streaming of the game or anywhere in the venue, right? So a lot of times you would see advertisers' content, which is displayed within the tournament, as a means of recouping some of the costs for setting up the tournament. I don't know, Adeyemi, can I share something? Is it possible? Let me just try. Yes, I can. One moment. So let me share with you. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So I think one of the best tournament organizers in East Africa, I would say, is PSG. And they started a very long time ago, around 2011.
No connection to the football team. We just have to clarify, of course.
No connection. This is not PSG in France. This is PSG in Kenya. And
You can
they
do F5 so that we.
sorry. So there you go. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. PSG stands for Pro Series Gaming, by the way, just in case you're wondering. So Pro Series Gaming, they came up with a variety of tournaments. So they have mobile gaming, they have battle and strategy gaming, they have PC gaming. They come up with LAN parties for the gaming community, and they also have now the big ticket tournaments. So they're very well organized in Kenya. So this is them in 2016. And if you compare it to what they grew into in 2019, you can see there's a lot of progress. For one, they moved from plastic seats to better seats. And by the way, when it comes to sponsorship, some of the gamers in the gaming community are actually paid to sell gaming related hardware. So for example, I'm seated on just a regular chair, right? But if I was a proper gamer with a proper gaming chair, you would get in touch, let's say, with a sponsor, and the sponsor would say, why don't you do some content around your gaming chair, and we could give you money to advertise the gaming chair. So in this case, they did not have gaming chairs, they had plastic chairs, but they have moved on and they're doing very well for themselves. So this is just an example of League of Legends in 2011. It started very small, and then now they started selling out in very huge stadia.
Their tournament to the right?
Yes, it's both their tournaments.
I know. I'm just more concerned about the one to the right.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, sorry, Sarah.
Yeah.
The pictures you showed, is it the guys in Kenya or just League of
So
Legends?
these are guys in Kenya.
Okay, all right.
The history of Pro Series Gaming. So they're an amazing bunch of guys. They showed up for our first sports and entertainment law executive course, and the slides I'm sharing with you are some of the slides they shared with us. And yeah, this was the first ever Atari games, actually, which was really amazing. I think they were played in, was it Stanford or Harvard? I can't remember. Stanford or Harvard.
Whoa.
The picture to the left in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And the prize was a 2-year subscription to the Rolling Stone magazine. And now compared to today, where the prize pool is over 34 million big ones. So the industry is definitely growing. So let me just share with you the ecosystem that they shared with us as well. Of course, this excludes a bit of what I had told you about the game development and the publishing, well, in detail. However, PSG or any other tournament organizers are required to send a license fee to the game publisher or the game developers. And the game developers thereby give them the permission to set up these various games, but the games can be streamed on various streaming platforms. So you have Twitch, you have YouTube Gaming, you could have, I'm trying to remember which other platforms. Yes. And I think now what Google is trying to do is they're trying to come up with Stadia. Although initially Stadia was a console sort of player system now into internet and streaming. And then obviously you could have your various teams and the fans who love watching and interacting with the players. Now, the biggest problems we have in Kenya especially is with the regulation of esports, because our government came up with what's known as a Sports Act. But aside from the Sports Act, we have an act known as the Betting Control, Gaming and Licensing Act. And unfortunately, they have something known as gambling, which they consider to be the same thing as gaming. Now, if you are attempting to come and register a club or a team or a federation with the word gaming, you will be sent to the Betting Control and Licensing Board, which is ridiculous. Right? So that's one of the things we have to amend. The second thing we have to amend is esports does not necessarily have a solitary, excuse me, it doesn't have a solitary international federation. So esports is not necessarily a federative sport where you have a clean federation at the top, at the international level, followed by regional organizations and then country national federations. It is so that way too many players, way too many tournaments, and the fact that the intellectual property in the game is owned by private individuals does not allow for esports to have a very neatly packed definition of being a federative sport. So for that reason, it's very difficult to register an esports federation, even in Kenya, although we do have one. But there are certain things that I have problems with. I just will not mention them here unless I'll be sued. But in general, those are the two things we have a problem with: government regulation or attempt to regulate esports, which comes with a lot of bullying of some of our players to join this federation, which is really a shell of itself. Because what happened is people just suddenly had, oh, you can make millions from esports, so let's register a federation and force everyone to come under it without understanding the entire ecosystem of esports. So I don't know, should I stop there for now?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Brilliant.
Very much on point. Left to me, you're striking the right chord. Or we've got to move. But I'm sure people would have questions, and that's what I want people to drop questions on the Zoom chat, the group chat on the right, so that Yemi can be collating the questions. I, for one, have a question as regards the sports bars, but I'm sure you would answer that much later, which you mentioned during your presentation. Let's hand this over to Peter Rippel-Szabo, all the way from Hungary. Peter.
Yeah, before moving to Peter, if I may, I just wanted to latch on to one point that Sarah made in relation to when you showed the old Atari tournament, which had the prize as a 2-year subscription to Rolling Stone, and compared to what we have now with the Dota tournaments, and we had the Fortnite World Cup. I think it was in LA last year. It was last year or the year before. I can't remember. Last year even. Yes. And I was speaking to David Santivanez a couple of months ago. I think Sarah might know briefly this story, but I have a national title in a game myself. I was in 2007 the Super Smash Brothers champion, and as far as I'm concerned, that tournament has never been held since. So I'm still the reigning champion 13 years onwards. I'm not going to have anyone call me out on Twitter because I don't want to try it again. But that tournament, when we had it, was long back when I was working for Nintendo as a young lawyer as well, and I took part in the tournament, and by a bit of talent and a bit of fortune, I won. However, what I won at the time, and this is 2007, not 1972 or whatever it was, 2007. I was given a customized Nintendo DS, as a prize with several games. I can't remember, maybe like 10 games or something. And I remember thinking back then, wow, imagine if you could do this every week and win different prizes for being good at a game. But it was also something that I didn't give too much thought to. And it's only a decade later, not even a generation, just a decade later, we're now talking of millions of for winning games. So it's very interesting to show, Sarah, how quickly this industry has developed. And it continues to work at that pace. So Peter, sorry that I jumped in and I stole away from your dulcet tones, but I thought it appropriate to throw that anecdote in.
Yeah, and thank you Sayo for giving me the word. Maybe there you're gonna be a player then in the future again. You used to be an intermediary, and now you may return to playing.
I'm retired. I'm retired now.
Yeah. So I think I'm here supposed to talk about institutionalizing esports in your country or in every country. So I think I have about 10 minutes, and I try to be as succinct as possible, and then still give that much information as I can. So I think so. The institutionalization need to look at from two perspectives: from the state and regulatory level, and from the private stakeholders level. It's so true, as David and Sarah have just outlined, that the world has really changed. Also, just as Dev said, so the youth, they are really now engaged in the online world. So there's internet everywhere. There are hardwares, there are softwares. So really, we use our mobile, we use computer, we use console, and we simply consume video games and consume everything which surrounds video games. And at least in my country, but I also suppose everywhere in the world, so gaming and playing video games is really part of our young generation's approach. I think it's simply inevitable that the state looks into how the digital world can be transferred into education. I mean, it's absolutely vital that gamification and the young learn to live within the online world, which is different, like the real world, and which also then could play an important role if you're part of an esports community or gaming community, or if you're part of a really professional esports organization. So I think from that perspective, the state need to look into at universities, at schools, high schools, elementary schools, just to make the online world part of our everyday life education, which then could the young lads help in turn to deal with the different issues which they may encounter in esports and gaming. Then if also from the regulatory state perspective, if we think about the lawmakers, there are so many facets of esports which can be regulated by the law. I mean, taxation, labor conditions, licensing, as just Sarah said, organization requirements, gambling, consumer protection, data protection, general civil law principles. So, of course, at the beginning, and in this quickly growing industry, it's not easy to pass specific laws for esports or designed to esports for gaming, and general laws are not easy to apply to that kind of this kind of industry. So from the state perspective, if they trying or if they are going to regulate gaming and esports, then they need to think about from the perspective of the industry. If we move to let's say the private stakeholders level, I'm pretty sure it's everywhere in the world, like in Hungary, in my country, or your country, Nigeria, that there are just lads who play together, play against each other at pubs, or just really they come together at home and they play, and there are many of them. Then I'm also suppose that there are clubs or kind of legal entities who organize a kind of video games and tournaments for people. So if then of course if there are youths, there are many people who are interested in an industry which is also a money-making one industry. Then of course there are private, let's say, investors, sponsors who think about getting into the industry. And in my experience, at least in Hungary and in Western European countries, there are three simple ways to do it. Of course, then the underlying legal reality can be more complex. But in my experience, you as just Sarah's example about PSG, you can be a tournament organizer on your own, having your clubs who maybe need to pay membership fee to get to your league, and then you have a kind of league like the major leagues in the US. It is also, let's say, common way to organize esports tournaments for everyone, which are open to everyone. I mean, there are a tournament organizer who just simply announce the tournament, and everyone can register online and then playing as a single player. In Hungary, it's also now, let's say, I wouldn't say a trend, but there are some initiatives that traditional the clubs of traditional sports are looking more and more into gaming, meaning they establish their own esports department, or they hire a coach, or they just try to engage and register players as an esports players, whatever it means, or gamers. So there are really also a kind of movement within the traditional sports industry. And if you just think further, so it's also my experience that we can call esports sport in this way and that way, but it's also quite obvious that esports is coming together with traditional sports. So in my experience, traditional sports federations, traditional clubs may thinking about collaborating with esports organization. The reason for that is that you can attract the young online socialized guys to the traditional sports and to really the training. But you need to be cautious not to draw away the guys from the traditional sports to the world of gaming. So it's not easy to keep the balance. So that's the biggest fear of the traditional sport. And also, if you are just planning about having a kind of esports organization, you need to look at the broader horizon. I mean, for example, in Africa, I'm pretty sure there are some continental initiatives to get, let's say, an African-wide community for esports, or just to try to regulate esports, or just try to create an African-wide legal structure. And of course, at the end of the day, if you are dreaming big in your country, you may also decide to look at international federations. And for example, I checked that there is no member from Nigeria in the International Esports Federation, which is currently the biggest international federation which tries to regulate esports as a traditional sports. And then, of course, I was talking about just the movements behind esports and gaming, but as Sarah and David said, so you need to consider the game publishers every time, because they are the king of the game, because they own the underlying IP. So maybe not at the beginning, but in the middle term, you cannot circumvent them if you try to do something in esports. And just getting quickly to the policies and regulations. So whatever form you operate your esports league, I think one important facet is that your competition has integrity, meaning it's stable, it can be sold, there are clear rules, everyone understands how it works, and it works efficiently. I mean, so I understand, game publishers understand, sponsors understand, players and fans alike understand how it works. And also it depends on how you structure your organization, but then you need always consider the game genres. So how many games you would like to organize competition for? For example, then your rules need to be able to accommodate it to shooting games, to virtual sports games, or team games, and so on and so forth. And if you need to team up with the game publishers, then your regulations need to be flexible enough to adapt yourself to the requirements of the game publishers, even if you have some basic organizational rules. And just to give you examples, what you can regulate as an esports organizer, an esports entity. This is really like in traditional sports, of course, meaning also considering the specific traits of esports. So I mean transfers, transfer windows, registration of players, status of players, anti-doping, disciplinary rules, exploitation of rights, which is really quite a different story. I could talk about 2 hours how to exploit rights in esports, really. And yes, competition regulations, really like in traditional sports. So I think so in my mind. So I have been heavily involved in esports for different stakeholders in the last 2 years, and this is my basic and fundamental, I would like to say, understanding of the esports institutionalization. So I hope it helps you to just get some insight. So that was from my part.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Shayo, I think something that both Peter and Sarah touched upon, and something that in my own experience, having had advisory queries put to our company from African stakeholders might be of interest, is the setup of an esports tournament. And of course, I'll touch upon this slightly when I speak in a bit more detail about education. But Sarah, you mentioned the increasing scale in relation to licensing fees, and Peter, you also touched upon it. Maybe between the two of you, I know that this answer is not structured because I'm asking you off the top of my head right now. But how would something like that be more manageable within the developing climate? I don't want to just say the African climate, because of course we've got dozens of different nations with each their own jurisdiction, but where we are trying to develop esports in a specific region or within a specific country, what would be the best way to start these tournaments without stakeholders thinking that there's big and easy money for them before they realize about licensing and all the other issues that come with it? Maybe we could start with Sarah and then go to Peter.
All right, that's fine. Sarah?
Yeah. So let me see if I got your question correctly, Dev. Is it that you're attempting to circumvent the licensing?
No. I would, the lawyer, I would never want to circumvent anything.
Okay, so we'll have a sidebar. We'll have a sidebar if that was what you wanted. But in general, start with the lower scale competition. Okay, the unfortunate thing about Africa is we're not a large consumer market. Number one, we don't buy, in terms of purchasing power, we're not considered a very large consumer market. Secondly, we have a lot of pirated games, right? So we first need to check ourselves and have some integrity. The other thing we need to do is come together as various communities. So the Kenyan community, if you can already have the numbers, for example, if you have 20,000 people playing Fortnite, okay, that's a good enough number to go to the gaming publisher with and tell him, can we negotiate about this price of yours, because we are a fledgling community and we're trying to build up the esports gaming industry. So you have the numbers to bargain with. Now, if you can't do it with just Kenya, maybe you can have a cross-country continental competition where you pool all the resources together. I mean, as an individual country, you might not be able to meet the licensing requirements, but as a pool of different countries with various players across the different borders, there's definitely a way you can meet the licensing of the various game publishers. So that to me would be a very good way to start.
And Peter, what would you say to
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I fully agree.
Sorry, Peter. Can Peter hear me?
Yes, I can.
Peter, sorry, before you come on, I just wanted to ask, maybe you would answer it, maybe Sarah would answer it. If there's actually a structured payment plan, for example, you say, oh, you're organizing a tournament of this scale, you're paying 5,000 naira. You're organizing a tournament of this scale. Is it scaled out so that you know the level at which you want to play, and then you can grow into it? I don't know if you understand that question.
So okay, just yeah. In my experience, okay, I fully agree with just Sarah said. So Hungary is a small market too. Consumer power maybe is better than in Kenya, but it's still below the Western European consumer power. And also in terms of population, Hungary is not the biggest. We have 10 million inhabitants. So in my experience, what tournament organizers do, that they organize a tournament and they giving no prize money away. And so basically, if you don't do much commercial exploitation and the prize money is below a certain level, and you have a community license, as you said, also mentioned, then you more or less free, I would say, to organize a tournament. And I fully agree that you will have the bargaining power to go to a game publisher if you have the numbers, the figures, if you have the fan base and the player base. And my good feeling would tell me that Hungary will likely be a market where game publishers will never ever organize esports tournament themselves, but they let it to, let's say, local organizers or local organizer in Central and Eastern Europe, and then share, let's say, the revenue. On the other hand, there is also an interesting issue in this regard, because even if a tournament could be or must be subject to a license, on the other hand, if many players participate and play with the video game, and they buy the underlying software, and they buy merchandise products, it may outweigh the game publisher's requirement for the license fee, because they would gain more by letting the tournament go than just step in and saying that you are infringing my intellectual property rights. So this is my good sense, and yeah, I hope it was helpful at least.
You know, it's a little bit worrisome, you know, hearing some of this feedback. Let me go to Sarah and say that I don't think we're the only ones that play or patronize pirated games. I think it's a global problem. I don't think it's peculiar to Africa. I think it's a global problem. Now, I do understand that we might have issues collating numbers in terms of sales numbers for some of these games. But I do think that Africa as a whole, together as a continent, still does reasonable business in terms of purchasing, you know, some of these games. Maybe because, you know, we don't do much of cross-border sales. So like I'm sitting in Lagos, Nigeria, I'm placing an order to Amazon to buy the new PS5. Most of us probably have people abroad who would buy and send it home. So it's hard to collate some of those numbers of those that probably received their game consoles or the individual games directly from the sales points. I think that it's about time they opened up their mind to Africa. Just even if it's just a little.
I think that's a very interesting point, Adeyemi, actually. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, what I would say, again, this is just my humble and limited experience. I agree with both yourself and Sarah in relation to the piracy, and that alone, a bit like Peter said about a couple of topics, we can speak about this for several hours. It is a global issue, and it's something that we see in all jurisdictions and in different forms as well. We see it in different forms. However, where I agree with Sarah is where it is happening in your own territory, on your own ground, it's got to be owned and mitigated to the extent that you can demonstrate your commercial buying power in the best way. And again, that's not only an African issue, that's an Asian issue, that's a European issue to a certain extent. I see a lot of parallels in the way esports is being managed at the mid-tier and the low tier to what we see in football. As well, in physical football, as opposed to FIFA or PES. So there are some things that can be discussed further in that sense. And I think what Sarah and Peter were touching on to as well is quite interesting, is the whole capacity building aspect of it. And I think that's where we can, certainly from Sarah, from an East African perspective in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. I know that we've got our friends from Rwanda on the call right now, and I know that we've got a couple of our friends from the Olympic Committee in Kenya on the call right now as well. So I think where we could start working in that region, which may also be applicable to the western side of the mother continent, would be to start with as many small and mid-tiered tournaments as possible, and continue the capacity building. Because ultimately, whenever you go to any developer or any third party asking for money or licensing or support, you need to show goodwill. Yeah, this is natural. Even if it's a football player that is going to a sponsor, going to Adidas saying, give me free boots, you need to show goodwill. You need to show a body of work that has been developed over time.
Yeah.
To demonstrate that you are worthy of that support and investment. Yeah. And ultimately, I think this is one of the things that we can start doing in certain areas. And already, with Shayo and Adeyemi, you guys have got a forum in place where you guys are working on capacity building. So, kudos to you in that sense. I think that latches on nicely to my part, or are we out of time? Shall I just cut myself off before I begin?
No.
Just go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Well, I'll be very brief. I'll be very, very brief because I am conscious of time, and there are a lot of questions here. David and Abdullah have just asked questions. We've got
yes.
Tal Segev, who is someone that Sarah and I have come across before, who is working at Colosseum, or working with Colosseum, and I know that he's got a very interesting question too. But what I was going to talk about very briefly is education in esports. And I think education and capacity building go hand in hand. When I say education, I'm not strictly talking about going off and doing a course in esports, even though that is something I'll very briefly touch upon. David also spoke about education in esports in his presentation right at the beginning. And education is a term that we use in the widest sense. It's basically raising awareness, building an understanding within all of the stakeholders and participants, and unearthing value, right? And once we've done these three things, in my humble opinion, and we've demonstrated that the industry, the sector, has got value within it, and we are generating eyeballs and we are plastering those eyeballs onto the sector, we can move towards giving the stakeholders a sophisticated understanding of the overall sector, which means that they then become sophisticated purchasers of the sector. So now if we go to a very simple premise, yeah, I've used some unduly terminology there, but if we use a very simple premise, you as an individual will only buy something that you understand. Yeah, this is simple. You go into a shop and you're only going to buy something that you understand. If you look at something on the shelf that you do not understand, then you're not going to pick it up until you understand what it is. This is just a natural concept. So the key here is trying to raise awareness to the extent that all of the stakeholders and potential stakeholders within the esports sector actually understand what it is. Now, at the moment, we've got certain cells and communities where there are participants who really appreciate the sector. They understand the difference between mere gaming and being an esports athlete, and they want to focus on that. But there is an inherent limitation in this, because if you go out on the street right now, almost in any jurisdiction, and you ask 100 people what esports is, 90% of that survey group probably wouldn't be able to tell you. Now, I'm not using trite statistics here, you know, it may be 75, it may be 95, whatever. But the point is, a significant majority of the people that you speak to wouldn't be able to understand. They are not sophisticated enough in the sense of appreciating the sector. And therefore, it follows that they cannot be sophisticated purchasers of esports, be it by way of financing it or getting involved with their time. So capacity building and the sophistication of the wider community goes hand in hand. And this is where we've got a big limitation, because even though we talk about it being the fastest growing sector and exponential growth over the last 10 years, and I gave a very curt example of this myself only half an hour ago, we still have a limitation where 80% of the global population don't really get what's going on. And the only way we can build that capacity and educate those people is, in my humble view again, from the ground up, right? It's got to be done in communities. This has got to spread. It's got to become viral to a certain extent. We need to create stories where the every man or the every woman can go into a tournament and rise like Rocky to win prize money or to win something else. We need to generate goodwill in the product. Without generating goodwill in the product, the sector is only ever going to remain as it is, still generating billions of dollars around the world, but remain in an incubated fashion. So education is something that, in my view, is first a very wide term. Second of all, we now also have several courses in esports around the world. We have several esports masters. The university at which I'm a director of also has its own esports masters. And I'm not here to sell that course in any way, shape or form. Our institution is a global leader in sports law, but the brutal reality is that it's a global leader in sports law, but the esports masters is still a new one. So that's not to downplay the course that my university provides. That's just to highlight that there are several courses out there doing really good things or trying to do really good things. However, there isn't enough there, in my view, in any master for a student to go in, go through the course process and come out and be employed overnight. It's a totally different field. These master degrees, in my view, tend to cater more, and it may be that Peter, Sarah, or someone else contradicts what I'm saying. They cater more towards those who are already involved in the sector or are just knocking the door of the sector, and they need that additional push. Now, we've also got a gentleman on the call right now who is a lawyer for LVP in Spain, which is one of the biggest organizations in esports and gaming across the Spanish-speaking world. And it may be that Shayo we'd have him on to speak to all the participants in the next couple of weeks. And he too went through an educational process. And I'm sure he'll be able to tell people in the future that his pathway wasn't so linear, that he got a qualification and he simply got into the sector. So the education is twofold. Yes, one can be educated. There are courses now, pay for courses and free courses, which can give accreditations, but those alone are not enough to simply give someone the ability to walk into a job, because the jobs per se are not often there. There's money in the sector. There's a lot of work to be done in the sector, but the sector hasn't backfilled enough for there to be bona fide employment where people can go and apply for all of these jobs. We need to build capacity from the ground up and start really developing and building these houses. Certainly in the countries where we may not have as accelerated an esports sector as we do in South Korea or in China or in the USA or in even the UK to a certain extent, not as much as the aforementioned three. So that's just a very short take on my perspective. Education and raising awareness in relation to the esports sector is absolutely primary. And I would suggest that it forms the foundation of everything we do. It's not appropriate to start talking about setting up a Fortnite tournament and getting sponsors for 2 or 3 million and having prize money of 300,000 US dollars before one educates oneself on the sector and understands what is actually going on and how that can be channeled in the right way. Because of course, short-term capacity building is only going to do one thing. That means you might generate a little bit of profit out of running a tournament, but forgive me for speaking French, you're only going to piss off the community that already exists. And that's the last thing that you want to do. Ultimately, when they are the people that are going to be supporting you and feeding your project for the long term. So capacity building from the ground up, and then at a certain level, formal education as and where it's required in order to really propel yourself into moving forward in the industry. And I think we're at a ripe stage. Sarah, you may agree with my humble suggestion. We're at a ripe stage, certainly in East Africa. And I can speak about that because of what I've seen on the ground. I don't want to say exactly what's going on in Nigeria because I haven't seen it. It may be similar. We're at a ripe stage where we can start doing little things, at the very least, to build that capacity onwards, to educate ourselves and our community in the primary sense, before we start taking things a lot further, rather than building the house from the roof down, which can only mean, in my view, catastrophe in the next couple of years to come. So that's my little rant on education. I do invite people to discuss and debate that view. I'm always open to criticism. So please, if there are any questions or perspectives in relation to what I've said, I'd invite that accordingly. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Can I just add one more thing with regard to education? I know we all want Africa to participate in what's going on in the global esports community. But one of the biggest takeaways I would love everyone to have is that we have our own games and we have our own African game development network. So game development is a big deal because if you own the game, you own the commercial rights, you own the IP, you can license it out. So the more Africans push for their own games to be played by Africans and even non-Africans, people beyond the continent, the stronger we will be, the stronger case we will make towards building even our own African esports culture based on our games. So I encourage everyone from the various countries, if you have local game developers, help that community, help them reach out to publishers and to the consumers, help popularize their games, because this kind of ecosystem is what brings in the money. Whereas if you're continuously paying for licenses to play other people's games, the money goes away from the continent. So that's my African bit.
If I also add something, I fully concur with that. So we have got the same experience in Hungary. Capacity building and sophistication of industrial education goes hand in hand. Because when my client started its project, the very first important step is to understand everyone what esports are or what esport is. This is really the kind of education. And in addition, in my experience, what I would say is that you need also advertise the positives of esports, that cognitive skills, stamina, team play, really there are the positive aspects, not that like, because many people think that esports is something wrong because you spend many hours in front of the computer and you just simply get your physical condition gets deteriorated, which is not the case if you are properly educated. And this is, I think, a very important point. And also when I started my presentation about the state and regulatory perspective, so it is simply just with us, it's inevitable that everyone is connected to the online world. And if esports is advertised in the right way, and at the same time education is done both privately and at the state level, then esports and gaming will mature something good. So I totally agree with just the guy said here before.
All right.
Great point, guys. Thanks a lot, Dev. It was short, but really um, hitting the nail on the head, the way you captured it. And unfortunately, I couldn't give my opening remarks. And what you said was exactly what I was going to say in my opening remarks as regards education. I remember when we had the first one, and Yemi already did a private message to me about going from bottom up as regards education in esports. And that's exactly what it is. And that's the same thing we say about traditional sports. The grassroots is actually where the numbers are. The grassroots is when you tell that grassroots to great story, it's one that jolts everyone to action and gets everyone to really want to know and want to be part of exactly what's happening. And that's why this conversation, like you and I have been discussing, is not going to be just like this. We just keep, engaging different people from different sections and bringing them to enlighten people. If we don't enlighten people, there's no way they will go to the shelf and say it's esports I want to spend my money on, just like you said earlier on. And the two other things which the Lagos ESports Forum is concerned about is engagement and empowerment. And I think they all come in. The moment you're able to educate people, it will be easy to engage them. From the government to the sponsors to the people who will participate, it will be very easy to actually get to engage them and show them the value proposition in esports. And after that, it will be easy for empowerment to happen. You build a player, you build a company, you build an organization that becomes a big name in esports. And I was doing a bit of research and I saw Nordwin Games. I don't know if Nordwin Gaming, and they're in South Africa already, bringing in big investments into South Africa. So
what's the name of that company, Shaya?
Nordwin Gaming.
Nordwin.
Based in India. Nordwin.
Okay.
Nordwin Gaming. They're based in India. They're in South Africa now. They came into South Africa this year, and they're looking to get into other African countries. So if that's a bit of empowerment, people will be employed in that company. People would actually, So I believe if we get it right with education, which is what the esports conversation of the Lagos ESports Forum is about, if we get it right with education, it will be easy to actually spread our tentacles and get the best out of esports for the African continent. So
Shaya, Charles has just asked if you could kindly, and I think that would be very helpful, if you could kindly type the name of the company you just mentioned.
Yes, I'll put it up. I'll put it up. You know, so thanks to everyone, from David to Sarah to Dev, Peter, Yemi. Let's move straight to the Q&A. Okay, someone has put it up. Emmanuel already put the name of the company up.
Okay.
Nodwin Gaming. That's the name. They're based in India.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the time. Let's go straight to the questions, and we have quite a few
Let me just
questions.
answer before you take the other ones. Let me just answer Tal Shegev from Israel, talking about collaborations and stuff. I think that was what his question was about. If we'll be willing to develop esports in Africa. Definitely. That's why this is happening with, you know, eminent speakers like Dev, who rallied around this, you know, to get David, get Peter, and get Sarah. So whatever partnership we can get, we're very much ready to work with anyone who's ready to develop the esports ecosystem in Africa. So we can take this off this space and advance the conversation as regards that. So I think that
Okay.
answers that. And I'm sure Sarah too is open to that in Kenya. All right, she's nodded already. All right, Yemi.
All right. So let's. I'm having to scroll up to be sure that I don't miss any question. Okay. I think the first question that I have here is from. I think it's from Emmanuel. I think I saw a question from Emmanuel. Just 1 second. Okay. Sorry, guys. There are a lot of comments, so I'm trying to. Okay. Okay.
I think it's after Tao. It's Ayo. So
Okay. So the first question, I think it has to do with legislation.
I think Yemi is off. Okay, let me just take that. Ayo. So
Yeah. So between gambling and gaming.
and the question is for Sarah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I think I've seen like 3 questions about gambling and gaming. So let me try and answer everything together. Okay. So first things first, definitely any state needs to properly define what gambling is and remove gaming from the definition of gambling, especially if you're talking about video games, because those are 2 very different things. Right now, gaming in our context means gambling within casinos.
No, it's same in Nigeria as well.
Yes, so that should be 2 very separate things. And then I think someone was asking, was it Emmanuel? Obam was asking, are loot boxes the same thing as gambling? They are considered, okay, let me define what a loot box is for those of you who don't know. A loot box is like a prize you get within a game, usually a fast shooter or a battle royale game, where once you complete a certain level or a certain task, you can go to your loot box and you pay to get that loot box, but you don't know what's going to be in the loot box. So it could be something as useful as a weapon, or something as useless as a skin for you to change, or you never know what you're going to get. So the problem with loot boxes is because there's so much uncertainty about what you're going to get, yet you've paid money for it, it is sort of like gambling within the game. Whereas if you reach to a certain level, of course, you would like to have certainty about what your prize is going to be. So there's been a lot of debate around loot boxes and gambling and whether or not they should be allowed, especially if you have in-game purchases being made by miners, because they have the access to purchase these loot boxes, and many times you might find that it's an item which is useless, that doesn't really help your game. Then there was a question from Richard about the sports betting companies, and whether we should differentiate between what's happening with the sports betting companies, because what happened in Kenya is some sports betting companies started putting betting on esports as part of their portfolio up until, well, things happened in Kenya, and now we have mad taxes for betting. And whether or not that should be something which should continue, I personally don't think sports betting is a bad thing. I think illegal sports betting is a bad thing. I just think that you should separate sports betting, and companies who have sports betting for esports are very separate from what esports is. So if you get those two distinctions, you should be okay. However, there are cases of match fixing within esports. Not always connected to sports betting, but it is, you do have cases of match fixing within esports where teams come together and collude to either throw a match or win it together. So we can talk about this for like a week, but to answer Richard, distinguish those two. Yes, you could have sports betting with esports as some of the items on the betting list, but do not have esports put together under the same definition as sports betting companies. I think those are the main ones concerning sports.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're having this conversation because I remember when I registered my company, it's a Halftime NG Gaming and Publications Limited. And I wanted to open an account in the bank, and they pointed out the gaming part. Were like, "Are you into sports betting?" I'm like, "No, I'm not into sports betting." So I remember having to go to the EFCC, get a clearance before the account was opened for me. Yep. So it's a huge, it's a great area. But there's another question for you here, Sarah, from Ayos Sonwolu. It says, is it illegal to conduct any type of community gaming without the permission of the developers? More importantly, considering that Africa is still developing in the aspect of gaming, how feasible is it for African small organizations to afford such fees?
I think like Dev and Peter had already mentioned, please do not circumvent the licensing regime that's put in place. Otherwise, you're going to be infringing on intellectual property. So unless you want a very strong suit slapped on your face, at the very least, take some steps towards getting permission to use the IP of the game developer or the game publisher.
Sarah, let me respond to you like a layman on the streets of Lagos. There are a lot of competitions in every street corner.
That's true.
FIFA, what have you. The prices range from a 6-pack of your favorite drink to a PlayStation to 10,000 naira, to 50,000 naira, to 100,000 naira, and what have you. And you can go on and on. Are we saying that it's imperative that at every level you get licensing?
It depends on what your prize is. If your prize is a bunch of bananas, it's very different from the commercial. The commercial value of your prize plays a big role on the kind of license that you're going to get, as well as the reach of the community. So you have to assess it on a case-by-case basis. So if it's just you and 5 other guys and you're gonna win chicken, nah, not really.
No, because you know what? You know, I'm asking this question. I know a lot of people that listening into this who are based in Nigeria will tell you for free that there are a lot of tournaments going on in every street corner. And obviously, that's why we're having this education anyway, we should be setting the bar high so that we can use it to, redirect the industry. But it's important that we're learning that it's important to get things licensed. We have another question from Abdullah. He says, how do you see the relationship between football associations and esports? Is it in favor of esports, or we need to completely separate both in the future? And this is a very good question, because I do know that if you want to, at some time, if you want to do a FIFA interactive competition, you need to go through your FA.
Yes.
So,
if I may pick this up,
okay.
So I have experience with that. So
all right, great.
Just first step is really I think so. Initially, every esports tournament organizer would start with a sports simulator game, like FIFA, because if somebody plays FIFA, everyone understands, because everyone understands the rules of regular football. So this is the first step. So at least in Hungary, FIFA is the game which is primarily built upon because of everyone can watch and understand. This is so true that, for example, there are FIFA games, international EA games, for which you can nominate a player through your local FA. And this is actually what we did in Hungary. And when we went to the FA with my client, who have a complete set of regulation for esports, and they have already organized numerous tournaments for FIFA, we went to the Hungarian Football Association, and we explained about our product. And as I said in my presentation, I would say, so it's very important that the decision makers within the local FA understand FIFA, I mean EA FIFA, and they understand the mutual benefits playing FIFA online and playing on the ground entail with each other. And in my experience, so for example, the president of the Hungarian FA is a businessman, and he understood the importance. So in Hungary, at least my client and their FA started to collaborate. So I think simply there is no way that the FAs can disregard these sports, because this could be one of the means by which they can grow their own fan base and their own number of registered football players. And simply that's it. So if I would be a decision maker at any FA, I would definitely consider esports. And if you just look at the Western European countries, we have the E-Bundesliga, the E-Premier League, the E-La Liga. So we have really, it's the E-Dutch League, so everywhere. So I think it's somewhere you get together. And of course, it's also because of the long-standing cooperation between EA and FIFA, because of the use of the players' images and the stadia and things like that. So I think that's definitely something where collaboration must be in the first place.
All right, so if I get Peter right, it's important to have a synergy of esports and the FAs working together to grow the industry. Shaya, you wanted to say something?
Dev, let Dev go first, then I'll go after Dev.
Okay, Dev.
I'm just going to put for want of a better word, I'll play devil's advocate. Because what Peter said, I completely agree with what Peter said. Completely agree with what Peter said. From the FA perspective, or the Football Association perspective, or the Football Federation perspective, it makes absolute sense. Because you're tapping into a community that may not necessarily be activated by your ordinary product. Now, forgive me for using crass business terms, but when we're talking about commercialization of the sport, we have to put it in that way. It's a product. Football is a product that is purchased and then is sold to certain broadcasters. Yeah. Now, if you're not activating a certain community with your ordinary product, you've got to, from a business perspective, activate that community in a different way. So it makes absolute sense from that perspective to do so. What I've found, however, and this is not everywhere, this is not a blanket term, It may differ in some instances, but those communities themselves may not necessarily want that activation from the football federations. Now, this is where we have another consideration, because it's absolutely correct that FIFA, and we've even seen it in this forum, when we asked right at the start, what games are you guys playing? And pretty much everyone to a T said FIFA, FIFA, FIFA. There was one guy who said FIFA 20 only. I can't remember who it was now. I'll scroll up. Who was he who said FIFA, FIFA 20? Diran Oni. So in that sense, it's definitely the most popular game to play in a lot of countries where this sector is developing. However, you then have your ardent communities that are focused on Minecraft, that are focused on Borderlands 2, that are focused on COD, Counter-Strike, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at it as a digitized sport, in terms of how frequently it is watched on Twitch or other platforms, the most commonly watched digitized sport is football through the platform of FIFA or through the coding of FIFA, right? But if you compare that to how often viewership is activated for other games via Twitch or any other mechanism, the most popular games watched online today around the world would be Minecraft, LOL, Dota, Counter-Strike, and so on. I'm not saying it in order, but these are the most popular. Out of the top 20 or 30, FIFA is the only one digital sport. And then you probably start getting into NBA, and in America, you get into Madden and all of these American football is the things we don't have interest in the UK. But in any sense, what we're trying to highlight here is the actual communities that are gaming and are really participating at a semi-pro or a pro level in esports. They don't care about the football federations. And this is where we've got to try and shift that impasse, so to speak, because the football federations can say, yeah, we want to come in. But the brutal reality is when you go to the developers that are already running Fortnite, when you go to Riot Games, the money that they're generating with their tournaments, they can look at the football associations and say, you guys are small money. We're not interested. You keep yourselves down there. We're up in the billions over here. So I think, yes, Peter's point is absolutely valid. And if I look at it from that perspective, I 100% agree. But how do we actually make the football associations understand that they are not the big boys here? In fact, there probably isn't even parity. They're looking from downwards up. And if we can get them to appreciate that and educate them on that, then I think we may be able to foster that relationship more easily in certain instances. But again, forgive me for that rant. And Peter, I hope I didn't completely divert from.
No, you did that, Dev, and I agree. And the point is that I think in terms of the money making, you are totally right. And in my experience, so the cooperation can lies really only if you go to the FA, the only thing you could also make you could them think is just you could make them think is if you go with the FIFA game, but with other games it doesn't work, as you just said. And then in terms of other video games, I don't think the games publisher would take the FAs into consideration. Or maybe I'm wrong, but at least in my market. So yeah.
All right, Shah.
Yeah, I was going to quickly come from the angle of my expertise in government relations, and I'm sure you can relate if we're going to even use the NFF as a case study in this question asked by Abdullah. Like Dev rightly pointed out, it should be a mutual relationship, not, and as it says, esports should even have a upper hand, but let's just even say it's at par. Everyone should benefit from it. So it's not about esports benefiting or the FA benefiting. Both should actually benefit from it. The esports ecosystem should grow by virtue of its association with the FA, and same, it should be reciprocated from the other side also. But the peculiarity of the African football administration is the major challenge, and I'm sure that's why Abdullah is asking this question. based on his experience from working with different federations across Africa. But I must point out that South Africa seems to be getting it right. The Bafana Bafana, no disparity whatsoever between them and the Bafana Bafana. Maybe not, I'm not talking about going into key details now, but I'm saying in terms of the way the South African Football Association has been dealing with the Bafana Bafana. So it seems they are getting it right. If the rest of Africa can actually maybe model after the way the South African FA has been doing their own thing with the Bafana Bafana, then maybe we'll be talking about the Super Eagles, the Pharaohs, and all that, and to be a good way for both parties to actually benefit from it.
Fantastic. That's a great perspective. David has two questions. He's asking, how do you see the future of esports in your countries and continents? And what are the main challenges that you encounter? I don't know if I can answer for my country, Nigeria. No, so I will answer for Kenya. I want to answer for Nigeria. I think one of the major problems we face is one of the things that just happened now. My power just went off. Power is one of such problems. Funding is another major challenge that we have. When I say funding in the sense of doing activations, putting events together, education, like Dev said, it's a major, major drawback. And I like part of what Sarah said in terms of us having a bit of a shift. In our previous conversation a few weeks ago, I actually mentioned it, that it's important that we create an ecosystem within Africa where we play our own games. It's about time we start creating our own FIFA, our own football manager. I'm mentioning sports because sports is more of my forte. Even games surrounding Boko Haram and what, so we need development in that. So that's another challenge. IT infrastructure is a major, major challenge for us here in Nigeria. We don't have any servers in Nigeria, so it's very difficult for us to play games online, even though we do play games online, but the connection, the cost of data, the lag, like, let me sound a bit technical, lag and what have you, affects games, and also the ability for us to spread our tentacles across board, getting everybody involved. We also have a bit of a cultural problem. Cultural problem in the sense that we still have people that feel if you play games, you're not a serious person. You don't take life seriously. We have that cultural problem. And the irony is that cultural problem exists more on the middle class, maybe lower middle class and lower class demography, unlike the high network guys who are more open-minded to encouraging this sport. So, and of course, we have challenges surrounding legislation, regulation and legislation. But we're on course. So let me move on to maybe Sarah can take challenges in Kenya.
Yeah, I guess like all other African parents, you're either a doctor, engineer, a lawyer, or a disgrace. So if you play esports, you fall in the latter community.
Disgrace are working at the same time, unfortunately.
No, but really, what I will say about Kenya is we're slowly but surely coming out of that headspace. Because now parents are being given a very different perspective of what esports players can do. Because a kid who plays esports or video games has the ability or the ability to react to situations as fast as a fighter jet pilot, right? So, and you can make money out of this. You can make it a profession. So that's something that now people are starting to wake up to. The other thing is, because there's so many other opportunities in esports, we're starting to see people getting interested in more than just the game itself. Because recently we had a very interesting thing which happened with Travis Scott. I don't know if you know Travis Scott, everyone. Are you familiar? Okay, those of you who are familiar with the Kardashians, Miss Kylie Jenner's baby daddy, he recently held a concert within Fortnite. And a few years before that, there was Marshmello. There was an artist called Marshmello who had a concert within Fortnite as well. So we're looking at the gaming industry also combining its efforts with other electronic entertainment artists and coming up with very interesting experiences. So even musicians are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, my music can actually feature in a video game. So that's something interesting to look at and to develop. And we're having all sorts of very interesting conversations around that. So I'd say I'm hopeful for esports and the gaming community in Kenya. Just the entire ecosystem growing, and I can't wait to see how far we get.
Brilliant. Peter? Okay, Dev. Okay, Dev.
I was going to say, because it was a question. So maybe after Peter, maybe David could highlight to us what's going on in Latin America as well, because maybe some of what's going on over there could be of benefit to us over here and vice versa. I was just thinking, because David, of course, you are here, you're on video, so maybe it'll be good for you to cover it too. But please, Peter.
Actually, I have nothing new to say. So, so education, community building. I think that's the key, and also make everyone understand what esports is. So really, yeah, I think so. In a country like Hungary, which is, we have 10 million inhabitants, so it's not like in Africa there are bigger countries. In Europe, the number of the population is now stopped, so there is no growth. And from our perspective in Central and Eastern Europe, so meaning countries east from the West and west from the ex-Russian states, so that's Central and Eastern Europe. And in my experience, not only in esports, but in every other industry, a cooperation among these countries may also be helpful, just to get out something of esports in the broadest term. But so apart from that, I have nothing special to say really. So so I'm passing on to David or Dev. So yeah.
All right. So David, can you tell us some of the challenges you're facing in Latin America, in Mexico?
Wow, the challenge. Okay, first the education. This is very important because the perspective of video games is not good. All people relationship the video games with violence, okay? And this is the problem to speak to esports or I don't know, or new industries. This is for education. The second problem is the new regulations. Okay, I talked to Sara. I'm saying in Mexico, the government it's created a new legislation, for example, for log bots, for classification systems, for consuming. And this is a big problem because the government think that children are the large consuming public for video games. What there really is the adult consuming. Another problem is the vision. Is the vision? I am read one question in the chat, and this question connect very well for this part. Okay, for example, in Mexico, the another problem is the opportunities. Okay, why opportunities? Okay, here in Mexico, the the Liga MX, a soccer league, created a Liga MX, a soccer sports championship. The problem is that they did not know how to direct into the consuming generation. Okay, this is the principal problem, and they sold is a show. Okay, the Liga MX or the football team or the soccer teams in Mexico don't understand the esports. It's only lasted 2 months and never considered it a real sport championship. So the community say the Liga MX is a show, maybe similar or like to Cirque du Soleil or like to a talk show with, let's say, Jerry Springfield, for example. Is this the big problem? And the football Mexican teams lost the opportunity to generate a large investment. Okay, for me, the principal problems in Mexico are education, much regulation, poaching. The poaching is the big problem in Latin America. This is the big problem in Latin America. The 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 pro players don't understand the contracts. Okay, the teams don't elaborate contracts very well. Okay, and most lawyers don't understand the esports, and you combine this and you have a big problem with poaching. Okay, for me this is the three principal problems now in Latin America: the education, the most regulation for the government, and the poaching.
Fantastic. So, well, some similarities as well in Africa. We obviously have issues related to contracts. And I was reading through the group chat, and I saw that the loot box we were talking about, Sarah, Emmanuel confirms that it's been banned in Belgium,
Yeah.
and some countries are, treating it as actual gambling. So it's, I think it's something we should keep in view and keep watching. And someone's even asking, what about FIFA points, FIFA coins? If you play FIFA online, you can actually buy coins, so these are some things that I think we'll keep in view. And as the conversation progresses, we would look at them in future. So we have another question from, sorry, please pardon me if I don't get your name pronounced right, Subrajit Chada. He says, hello everyone, my question is, in both sports and esports, we need coordination. I think Dev will help us with this. We need coordination of brain with body, and even in some place, we need strategy and reflection. Then why in many countries is esports still considered a part, something people pass time with? Why is it still considered something leisurely? Dev.
I'll latch on a little bit, and then I'm sure, of course, the others would help too. But let's not group all esports together just for a moment. Let us realize that someone, he or she that may be fantastic at Dota or playing as part of a team in LOL wouldn't be great at playing FIFA and vice versa. So what we've got to do is we've got to understand what we're talking about and really appreciate that there are fundamental differences between the different games that we refer to. Now, if we look at Sportaquad, formerly known as GAIF, so this is the global association of all the international sporting federations. And if we look at the definitions that are applied with regards to what becomes a sport, I'm not going to go into all of the history. Believe me, I can talk about this for hours because I actually lecture this subject, but I don't want to put you all to sleep. So, very, very briefly, the Sportaquad website, and you could probably look it up quite quickly, has definitions on certain things that are required for a sport to be referred to as a sport. So a competitive element, the eradication of the element of luck, and so on and so forth. And once you comply with these 5 elements that they have, you can then be categorized as a sport into one of 5 different sectors. So primarily physical sports like football, rugby, so on and so forth. Primarily coordination-based sports, so shooting or archery or whatever it may be. Motor-based sports, Formula One, MotoGP. Animal-based sports like equine sports, horse riding and whatever. And mind sports like chess and so on and so forth. So I think there are certain games which, and Sarah talked about it before, certain games, in order to be effective at the absolute elite level, it's demonstrated that you need to have stronger reactions than those of a pilot of a fighter jet. So there are certain games in which you could potentially get that game through the definitions and recognized as a sport. But to say that esports overall, to say that for esports overall would be a real challenge, because what you may do as an esports athlete for FIFA might be different for what you would do for, again, LOL or COD or Counter-Strike or whatnot. And it may be that some games or some pieces of software could pass through the definition and others couldn't. But going back to the wider context, I think this is in relation to Subhajit's question. The wider context is that a lot of people still refer to esports as pastime because of the lack of education and understanding around it. Growing up in the 80s, when I was playing video games, or Sayo, I think, mentioned in the chat earlier, arcades were what we used to go and spend our piggy bank money on. Yeah. My family looked at it as a pastime. And that's not to criticize them. It's a generational thing. They didn't grow up in that environment. The reality is now we can see that this activity, where previously before kids were just sitting on their bums doing nothing but using a joystick or a joypad for however long, can now be monetized and can generate careers. So I think it's really a case of filtering out that capacity building and that education within these countries and these communities to make the certainly the older communities or the uninitiated communities appreciate that this is not a pastime. So yes, some games can pass through the definition to be referred as sports. And why are they still regarded as pastimes? Because we haven't got the education or capacity building up to a certain sufficient level. Shubhajit, I hope I've answered your question. If I haven't, I'm sure I'll receive an email or something, and I'm happy.
Can I just quickly add to what Dem
Oh,
said?
yeah, sure.
So this is a highly philosophical question. What makes a sport a sport? At the end of all the debates, there's no unanimous decision on what sport is, that definition of sport is, because all sports are games, but not all games are sports. So video games, unless a community comes together and says, we declare this as a sport, it is competitive, it is organized, then it will just be considered a game. I'll give you an example of something very weird. There's something known as competitive bearding. It's a thing. You grow your beard, you make it artistic, you make it beautiful. There's a federation, they have tournaments, there are competitions, and they consider it a sport for so long as you're able to grow beards. I don't know about myself, but yeah.
It's Deb and I that will go into a...
But basically, the community of people who come together, who organize, and they define a game or a competitive activity as a sport, then it does become one. So esports, I wouldn't mind so much the definition. I consider them to be sports personally.
Well, I'm sure that by the time we have esports at the Asian Games, I think maybe next year in 2022,
2022.
and 2022, and then eventually it becomes, an Olympic renowned sports, then it can be widely accepted as a sport. I think that is what we have to wait for. I think we've
Firstly,
gone out of questions, but hold on,
first,
Shari. A lot of people are asking if they can get the slides from David and from
Sarah.
Sarah. Well, I'm sure you let us know if they can get that. You can get the recording of this. Shaya said you get it on YouTube on Sportscast TV. Interestingly, people talking about education of the FAs. Interestingly, last meeting we had the vice president of the Nigeria Football Federation who joined us on the call. I won't go into his comments right now, but bottom line, education needs to, we need to enhance the education, we need to enhance engagement to push this for social.
Yes, I was going to add to what you were saying about the Olympics, the Asian Games, all taking sports, esports on board. Of course, there's also the pact that was signed by the newly formed Global Esports Federation. That's the Singapore-based organization. They were set up in December. They also signed a pact with the Commonwealth to actually activate esports at the Commonwealth. So I'm sure that would further give credence and a bit of credibility to esports as a sport over the next couple of years.
I think the challenge is that you mentioned the Global Esports Federation, and Peter also touched upon this earlier. I think David also touched upon it, maybe even Sarah too, to be fair. We've got an issue at the moment where we've got several competing bodies trying to gain superiority and refer to themselves as the FIFA, basically, global governing body of all esports. Now, at the moment, IESF is probably the most populous in terms of the number of member associations that has signed up to it, but by a fairly slim majority, if I'm not mistaken. I think there are about 4 or 5 bodies that are competing at the moment. And one of the issues that I've discussed with a senior lawyer for Riot Games, who's a friend of ours, is the reality that when one of these federations, which has associated itself with LOL, for example, and LOL loses its popularity in a couple of years' time, and let's say the new Fortnite comes out, and I don't mean like Fortnite 2, but I mean the new global sensation comes out, and that will be associated with the international governing body of esports, IGES, some new federation comes along. That will all of a sudden be the biggest. So we've got a real issue here with regards to who's going to take power right now and who that federation or what games that federation attaches itself to, because if any of those games happen to fall, then we're going to have another power vacuum. And without going into mafia studies, when there's a power vacuum, there's chaos. Yeah. So we've got to be quite cautious about that. But again, apologies for going off on a slight tangent.
No, it's fine. It's almost like boxing. You have all these sanctioning bodies.
Absolute disaster.
All over the place. Yeah. So it's interesting. Emmanuel Oyelaki says Nigeria has endorsed these sports as an official sport. So hopefully maybe you'll be in the National Sports Festival whenever that happens. Tolu asked a question. I know Sarah has answered, but it would be nice to Sarah to let us know what the response is. How does it work for local game makers? Do they have to partner with foreign game publishers for validation? Sir?
So you don't. You can actually either self-publish or join an independent publisher to help push your game to the consumers. But it depends on who you're targeting as your consumers for the game. So there are important things or important questions to ask the game publishers that you're approaching. So what I've done is I've left a link to a YouTube video which you can watch on your own later, which explains the kind of questions you should ask when you're approaching game publishers, so that you get the most out of the contract that you have. So that would be an important thing to watch. Please pardon the French. Okay, pardon his French. He curses a lot, this guy. But he has very important information. So if you're an African and you want to understand how to get your games published, then that would be a very good resource to look at.
All right, brilliant. Emmanuel says there's Westco 2, and they just recently entered into a partnership to recognize each other. That's Westco and ISF. Eventually, all federations should become just one. That is Emmanuel's dream. Hopefully, all egos aside, they will decide to, to come together as one. Which other one do we have here? Just 1 second, guys. Shayo, okay. Okay, I think that's about it. And we'll go to Shayo for his final comments.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Yemi. Let me at this point let me start with Sarah. Thank you so much for being part of this. Very insightful. Same for David. In spite of the challenges, David is definitely a fighter. Wrestled the network to get across to us, and we actually, I also lost my own network, so I came in late for your presentation. But when I came in, the slides I saw were very, very nice. I hope you can share that with us so that we can digest beyond what you've shared. Thanks to Peter, all the way from Hungary. Really appreciate you also. Very insightful as regards institutionalization and affiliation issues. And last but not the least is the funny man himself, Dev. Thank you so much. Dev actually is the man who made this happen, not me, not the Lagos ESports Forum. He's been a partner in progress as regards this. We wanted just him, but he said, no, let me talk to some other people and bring them on board. And that's exactly how he pulled this eminent speakers together. Unfortunately, it's on Zoom, so we can't have a round of applause for all the speakers, but all the same, I'm sure the guys out there are all clapping and appreciating you guys for this time. And as I said earlier on, the Lagos ESports Forum is all about education, engagement, and empowerment. Those are our three focus. And for anyone who's ready to, put work to it with us, we are very much open to every form of partnership we can get. We're working in line with the esports Nigeria. The president is present here, also Emmanuel Oyelaki. And we know we talked about institutionalization in Nigeria on its own the last time, and I know he's working with that alongside the Ministry of Youth and Sports Development. So that's my remark. Thank you to everyone. Really appreciate this, and I hope we would have something bigger, better, maybe something physical in the nearest future. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, everybody. So somebody dropped one last comment. I'm sorry that I have to say this, but Tolu says that, and that's for Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. Can this help African esports industry pull away from the dependence of foreign publishers and their non-servers?
I think David said he wanted to say something else.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think you'll find the answer in the video, so it's all there. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, David, any final comments?
Oh, yes. I want to say something before to finish this. 2 points. One for my 2 points to my participate. I wanted to add something about the old lions, the parts of the most or the big professionals. Okay, this may surprise you. Okay, I see your face, but it's something very Latin American. It happens in all professions, not only in for lawyers. Okay, I have had the opportunity to speak with colleagues for the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia. It's something that doesn't happen. Okay, everyone learns and everyone teach. There is an data ecosystem, so maybe my experience sounded strange, but in Latin America, it's a reality. Okay. Now, I don't finish my presentation, but don't worry. For in this moment, I want to share 7 tips so you can build a career in esports. Okay. Perhaps the best thing is to share it with Sayo and post it on Twitter. I don't know. I sent an email with these 7 tips, and you public this in Twitter. I don't know. For me, it's the best idea in this moment. And finally, I want to say that for build a career in esports, no exists a formula. There is no formula. These 7 tips, there's not a formula. Okay, these tips will help us get a clear idea of what to do, but it's all starts with education and play esports. Okay, this the most important or the most important activity to build a career in esports is the education. So read everything, see see videos. This is very important. Exist content in YouTube. Play the esports. This is very important because you play, you practice the esports, and you understand the ecosystem. You understand the idea. You understand the sport. This is all. This is all I say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So you share the slides with Shire, and we can then do a bit of a series on it on Twitter. So thank you to everybody that's joined in. Thank you, Dev. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Emmanuel Leila King, for joining in. Thank you, Peter from Hungary. Thank you so much. Everybody that joined in. Sorry, I can't mention your name one by one. Thank you very much for joining in. And Sarah, you are the one that will be coming to more often because you are just down the road in Kenya.
Karibu Kenya, you're very welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and have a lovely weekend, everybody.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Richard. Richard is waving. Hear me?
Yeah.
Is it possible to take people out there?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I can't seem to get Abdullah out. Abdullah, if you hear me, we're done. Bye.